Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP 103.3 FM, this is The Final Straw, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting out of occupied Cherokee land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world. This week we air 2 interviews about the struggle of Alabama activist and prisoner Kinetic Justice. Kinetic, aka Robert Earl Council, conducted a 6-day hunger strike because he was transferred with no altercations, investigations, or disciplinary actions, and after just having ended an almost 54-month stint in solitary confinement as punishment for Kinetic's activism. First up, Swift Justice, a prisoner currently in the Alabama system, member of the Free Alabama movement, and founder of Unheard Voices OTCJ. Swift talks about the Free Alabama movement's inside-outside work, the organizing work that prisoners, former prisoners, and outside community members have done in raising awareness of the slavery system of American prisons. Swift also talks about the inspiration and struggle of Kinetic Justice and the attempt to expand the prison system in Alabama by Governor Kay Ivey with a $900 million project to build 3 Supermax facilities. Swift's writings can be found at unheardvoicesotcj.wordpress.com and on his Twitter at unheardvoices16 and Fedbook page linked in the show notes. Then we talk to Pastor Kenneth Sharpton Glasgow of the Ordinary People's Society out of Dothan, Alabama. He'll talk about Kinetic, about the harm reduction and community empowerment projects that he's involved in. You can learn more about the related projects at theordinarypeoplessociety.org, and you can follow the work of the Free Alabama movement by checking out freealabamamovement.org and Kinetic Justice by visiting his support blog, freerobertearlcouncil.wordpress.com. Check out our website this week for a link to the latest Bad News, Angry Voices from Around the World, podcast of news from members of the A Radio Network. This month, the podcast features updates from Greece and the UK, anarchist women's perspectives from Turkey, and anti-gentrification struggles in Berlin. The Final Straw is also a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts. Here's a jingle for another member of CZN.
Anarchism, a social philosophy which aims at the emancipation, economic, social, political, and spiritual of the human race.
Anarchism is not bombs, disorder, or chaos. It is not robbery or murder. It is not a war of each against all.
Anarchism is the very opposite of all that. Find out for yourself. Tune into Subversion 1312.
Live, Tuesdays 9 to 10 p.m.
on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM or streaming 4ZZZ.org.au.
Podcasts and related content available at subversion1312.org
and channelzeronetwork.com.
Conclusion?
We stand for anarchy, anti-capitalism, anti-racism, anti-authoritarianism, internationalism,
autonomy, direct democracy, ecology, self-organization, solidarity, anti-fascism, anti-neoliberalism,
anti-nationalism, atheism, equality, and freedom.
Dear listener, if you're hearing this show for free, good. That's exactly how we want it, and that's how it's always going to be. If, however, you have a few extra bucks to spend on helping us create this weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian content, they would be much appreciated. Money is a super unfortunate construct, both made by and made more real by capitalism and class society. You can make monthly or one-time donations of any amount of these constructs, and believe me, any amount greatly helps, by following the links up at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org/donate, at which place you can also see a bunch of shiny swag for sale, including but not limited to t-shirts emblazoned with our show logo. Keep your eyes peeled for more sticker designs in the near future. Finally, thanks a million to all of those who have donated so far. Your support in this way is truly cherished and appreciated.
And now some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what?
Back in mid-January, there was a rather high-profile case of cops behaving badly. It happened in St. Louis. From the information gathered so far, however reliable or unreliable it may be, there were 2 police officers on the clock, but hanging out at the apartment of Officer Number 1. Both Officer Number 1 and Officer Number 2 were white males. No one so far has offered any explanation as to why Officer Number 1 and Officer Number 2 were hanging around in Officer Number 1's apartment while on the clock. It would appear that the St. Louis Police Department has a very loose definition of the word work. Officer Number 1 and Officer Number 2 were joined at the apartment by Officer Number 3, who was off duty. Officer Number 3 was a white female officer. No explanation has been given as to why Officer Number 3 was hanging out at an apartment with 2 colleagues who were on the clock. By the official account, all 3 officers were drinking. In the midst of this, Officer Number 1 and Officer Number 3 supposedly undertook a game of modified Russian roulette, pointing a revolver at one another and pulling the trigger. As a consequence of this game, Officer Number 1 shot Officer Number 3 in the chest and killed her. The mugshot of Officer Number 1 being taken into custody shows injuries to his face that look like he was doing more than playing some sadistic drinking game and shooting his friends. Also, by media accounts, he refused blood tests that would reveal whether he was hopped up on illegal drugs. If this description is a bit confusing, let's try it like this. It's something my mom would do after giving me a bath when I was little. You'll have to take off a shoe and a sock and start at your big toe. Follow along with me. This little piggy was in his apartment drinking with loaded firearms. This little piggy went along. This little piggy was found shot in the chest. This little piggy has no choice but to investigate. This little piggy will go wah, wah, wah all the way to court, bringing charges, but only because he has to. Okay, you can put your sock back on. What strikes me as somewhat curious is the absolute lack of any effort, it would seem, to dig into the activities of the first 3 piggies. Everything about the story seems very, very wrong. What were they doing in that apartment? Why were they drinking on the clock? What was the off-duty female officer doing there? Why were they taking turns aiming a gun at one another? What kind of game is that? Why was the shooter obviously scuffed up in his mugshot? Why did he and his partner refuse drug tests? And why would he shoot a fellow officer when he could shoot an unarmed black man and get away with it, like all the other white cops do in St. Louis? Hands up, don't shoot. Now, just a quick observation here. But when things break bad, people often tell lies to cover up the bad stuff. The lie is designed to make the bad stuff look less bad. So when you consider the story that these cops have told, and if you suppose that just maybe this story is a lie to cover up the bad stuff and make it look less bad, doesn't that make you wonder just how horribly, mind-bendingly, cataclysmically bad the bad stuff must be? When they admit to drinking in their apartment, shooting a fellow cop in the chest while on the clock? If that's the cover story, imagine what they must be covering up. The only way idiots start off with a cover story that ridiculous is if they are covering up the fact that they've killed more people than smallpox. Somebody needs to take a crowbar and pound holes in that cop's apartment walls and search for bodies of hundreds of half-eaten prostitutes or something. With a cover story that bad, this cop might be responsible for snatching up every single milk carton kid on the planet. So anyway, you may recall that after Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, and quite a few times since then, I have said, guns don't kill people, cops do. Save lives, kill cops. And somehow that keeps getting broadcast on the radio. Quite frankly, I don't feel safe with the FCC letting people like me get away with stuff like that. But in light of the events in this case, it would appear we no longer have to kill cops. All we need to do is hand them the instructions for a fun new game called St. Louis Roulette, along with a bottle of gin, and we can just let nature take its course. By my thinking, one dead cop in St. Louis isn't the problem. The problem is that there are still 299,999 cops still alive and kicking out there. We need to get them hooked on this fun new game. A couple of really good weekends of St. Louis roulette and binge drinking, and there might be so few cops left that we'll be able to take unarmed black men under 40 off the endangered list. Guns don't kill people. Cops do. Save lives. Promote St. Louis roulette. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain from the Super Duper Max in Youngstown, Ohio. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can write to Sean Swain at his new/old address at Sean Swain, number 243-205, Ohio State Penitentiary, 878 Coatesville Hubbard Road, Youngstown, Ohio, 44505. To read more of Sean's writings and keep up on his case, visit seanswain.org. Could you please introduce yourself and who you organize with?
My name is Swift Justice, and I am the founder of Unheard Voices OTCJ, and I am a member of the Alabama Movement.
Could you talk a little bit about who Kinetic Justice is and what the Free Alabama Movement is?
The Free Alabama Movement is a grassroots group that was actually started inside of prison by confined citizens who are incarcerated in Alabama. Kinetic is one of the founders of the Free Alabama Movement. And, just to describe Kinetic, he is not only a brother to many that are in prison, but, he's a comrade that is a soldier for justice and to expose the injustices that go on inside of Alabama's Department of Corrections, as well as now as we've evolved around the country, so to speak, under the national movement.
If I understand correctly, the Free Alabama Movement and the other, Free Ohio Movement, Free Mississippi Movement, these different groups share a critique kind of based on Michelle Alexander's reading of history and racialized incarceration in the United States since the end of antebellum slavery. Can you talk about the ideas that y'all are pushing and what models you operate under?
I mean, the ideas that we push are simple. We're totally against slavery in any form. And the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution legalized slavery through its amendment as a punishment for crime. So the way we see that is we don't see that as necessarily as an injustice, as we see it as a crime against humanity in itself. That is the idea that we push, and that's what we started off on in 2014 when the Free Alabama Movement actually first rose out of the dust. We are totally against free labor inside the prisons, and anybody who follows the prison movement knows that the prison industry is a multi-billion-dollar industrial complex, and it's growing every year. And it only grows and evolves the way it does is because of the incarceration rate of American people, just for the need of slaves.
And can you say a few words about what kind of work Unheard Voices does?
Unheard Voices is a nonprofit organization that, when I founded it, the very first thing that went through my mind was the school-to-prison pipeline. And my heart personally goes out to the young children. Anybody who does any kind of research on these prison issues, they know that children who have incarcerated parents have a 7 out of 10. There's a 70% chance of actually following in their parents' footsteps. So what I would like to see, and what we at Unheard Voices actually do, is try to stop the school-to-prison pipeline, at least slow it down and staunch it some by reaching out to children who have incarcerated parents and uniting that child with that parent in some form or fashion. We have a program that we do that is actually a school supply program where the parent inside the prison system actually gives the child school supplies when they start school in the beginning of the year. That basically promotes the child to actually look at education over running the streets and following the parent in their footsteps.
So I'd like to refer to an article that you wrote for Unheard Voices blog. In it, you talk about how Governor Kay Ivey is proposing a $900 million plan to build 3 new prisons to supposedly alleviate the pressures on the ADOC, and the Alabama prison system boasts the highest levels of inmate murders and suicides in the country. or among the highest. Fight Toxic Prisons has argued that the recent repression of Kinetic Justice, may apparently be like stemming from the ADOC Commissioner Jefferson Dunn, and as an attempt to silence this well-respected prisoner advocate. Does that seem right to you? Does that seem like that's a line that could be drawn?
That is very much the line that's being drawn. For the simple fact is, even wardens are saying that it's not been done by their call. It was done from the ADOC Commissioner's office, which is Jeffrey Dunn himself, and Cheryl Price, who is a regional coordinator for the Alabama Department of Corrections. And the fact is Kinetic's resume pretty much speaks for itself. He has been successful orchestrating strike after strike in the Alabama Department of Corrections, and not only Alabama, but throughout the nation, mind you. And he has orchestrated these things from a prison cell in solitary during times of strikes across the nation, such as in 2018. 2016, he was one of the ones, and he was still in the lockup then. They know he's a very dangerous individual. But when I say dangerous, I want people to make no mistake about this. He's not dangerous as far as violence. He is dangerous as far as using his mind and the law and influence to do things on a peaceful level inside the prison system, other than on a violent level. So when you go to hurt an organization such as the Alabama Department of Corrections in their pocket by shutting down work, that really puts a panic inside the organization, such as with Jeffrey Dunn. And what Jeffrey Dunn is not wanting to see right now is Kinetic uprise and get an organized strike going on dealing with these prisons being built, because the guise that is being used to get these prisons built is to say that we have to have these prisons because of the murder rate and the lawsuit that is pending in Braggs versus Dunn in the federal courts. And that's not the case. When you look back at what the Judge Thompson actually ruled on, he ruled on inadequate mental health care and the suicide rate. There was nothing even mentioned about in the lawsuit that was brought up as issues or grounds that was talking about the violence or even talking about the conditions of prisons as far as the structural basis of it. So that's what Jeffrey Dunn and KIB has done. They've actually tried to turn this into a security and a, what's the word I'm looking for, a risk to public safety, so to speak, in order to get these new prisons. Now, we, on the inside, we see through one of the main aspects of what they're going to do. They keep talking about they're going to build 3 new prisons for $900 million, which will be super maximum security prisons. And they're going to shut down remaining prisons that are existing prisons that are across Alabama. That's not going to happen. What you will see is those 3 prisons being erected and the existing prisons still being ran. All they want is more room for more bodies.
This is The Final Straw Radio, and I'm William Goodenough. You're listening to an interview with Swift Justice, an Alabama prisoner, about resistance to prison slavery and the situation of prisoner Kinetic Justice.
And can you talk about what sort of profits that'll put into the pockets of contractors and into the pockets of developers, and also what, like, it seems like when states end up making shifts like this to, we're just going to upgrade our facilities and upgrade the technology available, that they end up using it to implement more and more strict, more and more dehumanizing technologies, more and more monetized technologies for the individual on the inside without, I mean, where's the money in there for increased mental health treatment or like increased programs? To your knowledge, do those exist? Are those being proposed?
Those are definitely proposed. But the question is once they're proposed, is it followed through with? That's something that is definitely not happening inside the Alabama Department of Corrections, or if I had my guess, any Department of Corrections across America. We do know that is one of the famous lines that politicians use. Yeah, we want to rehabilitate the offender. But when you get down and say, with common sense tells you that the actual government or the entity that is controlling your prisons is not looking to actually rehabilitate any individual, for the simple fact is the best customer is a repeated customer, and the recidivism rate must be kept up in order to keep the prison rate going the way it is. So the actual object is not to rehabilitate nobody. For instance, I see many times where money is given in this fund or that fund for certain aspects of rehabilitation, and nowhere inside the prison system does anybody actually see that money being spent to a good use or anything being improved as far as education or rehabilitation.
What do you think would happen to the Alabama prison system if the 13th Amendment as it stands were rewritten to no longer allow for the extraction of labor from people that were quote-unquote duly convicted of crimes?
I would be the first to tell you, and if you know anything about me, I will be the first to tell you that the prison industry would collapse. It would not collapse all overnight, but there would be no need to house as many people inside the prison system and keep them in the prisons as long as they do anymore. Their objective would have to change, and it would have to be to rehabilitate individuals, sincerely rehabilitate these individuals, and put them back out into society so that they can be functional once they get out there. If you did that, and the 13th Amendment, the federal Constitution was rectified, so to speak, and the exception clause was taken out of the 13th Amendment, that would force the Alabama 1901 state constitution, Article 1, Section 32, to also remove the exception clause out of the Alabama Constitution. Then you would have to actually pay in the minimum wage to individuals who actually work these jobs, especially industry jobs, inside their kitchens and working canteen jobs, etc. And once you did that, you can actually hang up, because now you have more of an overhead to actually run something. And yeah, you would actually kill the root problem then. You would actually kill the root problem of mass incarceration, as they call it today.
So as someone inside, can you speak about incarceration in Alabama and, in your view, what incarceration of Black, brown, and poor bodies today in America says about what America is?
Well, over the time that I've spent in prison, I have seen the consequences and the effect that incarceration has over the Black, brown, racial status quo. But over the years, as time goes by, you see more and more of a conviction on whites in the side of the state of Alabama. Now, this is something funny that I've noticed. The statistics have actually soared with the white class to the point of where they're getting a higher and higher conviction rate. Make no mistake, the Black and brown race is affected more so because of the targeting areas and the fact that majority of the Black and brown ethnic groups inside of Alabama are poor. Mind you, I don't see this personally any longer as a racial status problem. I see this as a social status problem. We do not see the first rich individual inside the prison system here in Alabama. We see whites who come from the trailer parks, and we see Blacks who come from the projects. All are poor individuals and come from poor social classes. So
would you say that it's like a byproduct of capitalism, basically?
That's exactly what it's becoming. And it was actually that for a long time, although as history shows that the Black community has always suffered the most. We know that. And they're still, to this day, suffering. There's no doubt about that as well. But it was always the poor man who was being brought into and sucked into your prison industry. And the simple fact is, even if you look at it from the 1863, post-1865, and they were focusing on the sure enough poor, which were your former slaves, those who could not pay fines when they were convicted under the black codes. They could not afford these things, and they had to go and work these debts off, so to speak, and it was basically debtor's prison. And today's debtor's prison is actually evolving into ankle bracelets, etc. And that is their way of classifying and actually evolving to start targeting the middle class people in America, especially when you're looking at movements such as the First Step Act and involving more and more digital monitoring. And the only people that can afford that are your middle class individuals who can even afford to pay the high-priced monitoring fees for those. But what happens once they can no longer afford the monitoring fee? It's going to be the same thing as the black code. They will then wind up taking them to prison because they can no longer come up with the financial means to actually, I don't know what's the word, to actually, be a part of the privilege of being monitored digitally, so to speak. So yeah, it's very much capitalism.
Do you see yourself in the struggle for prison abolition, and what do you foresee as exciting, and besides the abolition of the 13th Amendment as it is, exciting next steps? Actually, I get asked that question a lot as far as the difference between prison abolition and slavery abolition. I consider myself a slavery abolitionist. A lot of mixed insights on what prison abolition is. I live in a prison full of people, and I see and I come across many different types of people. Do I believe that prisons should be abolished? I wish they could. I don't think that is a logical pattern. I mean, a logical thinking. I just can't see that right now. Not today, not the way we as people look at things and we people address things. I believe that there should be some kind of removal from society for certain things, just so that them individuals can be truly rehabilitated. Do I believe in the prisons as they are now? No, I do not, because of the way they stand. If I could abolish this kind of prison, of course, I'm all behind prison abolition, behind that aspect of it. But first and foremost, I think the most important part that we must focus on is the slavery abolitionist aspect, because I do believe that the 13th Amendment itself is the root cause of everything that we fight today. In every form that we fight it, whether we call it prison reform or prison abolition or slavery abolition, the root cause is the slavery exception clause. So is a motivating factor for states perpetuating prisons like they are because of the amount of actual income they make off of workers, prisoners, or is it, monitoring or keeping control of surplus labor populations, or, because it's pretty clear that a lot of people are inside for victimless crimes, and it's not doing the job of rehabilitating.
I agree on that, but it's also a multifaceted issue. I believe that it is also a means to control elections. I believe it's a means to control the population. Like I said, it's multifaceted. We could probably go on all day long on possible reasons and on why the prison industry is booming the way it is. But the overall reason, I believe, is a monetary value behind how much money they make behind these, especially with the private prison industry now coming up booming the way it is. The Geo Group and Core Civic, they're perfect examples of two multi-billion-dollar companies that profit more and more and more. And more companies are actually coming and rising up now and taking and venturing off into the private prison industry. So, yes, they're seeing a huge capital coming from individuals who are inside the prison. And if you take note, these groups such as Core Civic and the Geo Group have a huge lobbying group, and they have involvements in actually perpetuating new laws to actually make sure that people are coming to these prisons.
Fair point. Do you have time for a couple other shorter questions?
Man, I have a long time. Go ahead.
Can you speak about the impact of the activism of Kinetic Justice, just to bring it back to him? What sort of ripples have you seen from this man's work?
Oh man, the ripples are gone nationwide, man. I can't. I don't know that I can even describe that. Look at what the brothers in South Carolina do. Can I sit there and say that Kinetic Justice is solely responsible for what they did and with Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, or any other formulated inside prison organization? No, I can't. But these brothers over there, they mirror Kinetic. I mean, I talk to them personally. I listen to them, man, and their mind frame and their thought pattern is exactly the way Kinetic's is. And the respect that these brothers, all the way from not only Alabama, but Florida, California, South Carolina, New York, man, they have an utmost respect for Kinetic, man. The impact, I believe, and the ripple effect it's been tremendous. I believe that many people do. I personally, he's my mentor. He's a very good close friend of mine. He brought me into this movement. He taught me in this movement. He did a lot for me in this movement. So yeah, when I do, I think and I speak, I try my best to represent what Kinetic represents, and how he actually sees the fight.
Do you know about the protest that's scheduled for March 15th? Is tomorrow, basically, when we're talking. Is that going to go on, and where and what is it going to be?
Actually, it's been called off, and it was scheduled for the 16th, and that would have been on a Saturday. But the reason it's been called off is because part of the part of the demands with Kinetic being in solitary behind a non-infraction solitary confinement move was, if y'all don't, then we're going to disrupt your business as you know it, and we're going to bring attention to what y'all are doing here in Alabama. And from what we was told yesterday by Kinetic himself, as well as the Alabama Department of Corrections attorney, who is representing the Department of Corrections in the matter of Kinetic, they are going to return him back to population once he's released from medical. So now it's a waiting game. He came off of a hunger strike yesterday. So by him coming off the hunger strike, we've pretty much laid off the Department of Corrections as of right now and at this moment, and just to give them their chance, a fair chance, and holding to their word, and seeing that Kinetic is put back in the population. Now, mind you, if he's not placed back in the population, like the attorney said and told him that they would do, then, we'll take our next step, whether it's to march into Montgomery, right upon the Department of Corrections Commissioner's office themselves.
Well, how can listeners keep up on Kinetic's case, and also how can they support and keep up on your writings and your work?
Well, of course, you know that I personally have someone who puts my writings and stuff on WordPress, which is Unheard Voices, otcj.wordpress.com. But one of the things that I do know for a fact is Kinetic also has a blog that someone keeps up for him, and I believe that is freerobertearlcouncil.wordpress.com. They can also follow Unheard Voices on OTCJ on Twitter, and the Twitter information is Unheard Voices OTCJ at Unheard Voices 16. We also have a Facebook page, which is up under Jones Naisha. That is our organization page. And if someone wants to contact us, they can always contact us through our email address, and our email address is unheardvoices78@gmail.com.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Swift, for making this happen and for the conversation. And good luck and health.
Man, look, I appreciate y'all taking the time out to put our stories out, and that is what really means a lot, and that's what keeps people like Kinetic and myself going in this fight, man, is that people are willing to let our voices be heard, because for so long our voices were unheard. And I think that's very important, that a lot of media attention is being brought not only to Alabama now, but the nation as well as far as what's going on. And it's sad that we live in a country that has the highest incarceration rate in the world, all based on slavery. So, yeah, it's sad, man. We appreciate y'all. We really do.
Y'all are an inspiration.
This is the Final Straw Radio, and I'm William Goodenough. This is Pastor Glasgow of the Ordinary People's Society talking about inside-outside organizing in Alabama against poverty, violence, and prison slavery.
Could you please introduce yourself to the listening audience?
Pastor Kenneth Sharpton Glasgow. I'm the founder of the Ordinary People's Society, co-founder of the formerly incarcerated convicted people and families movement, also the founder of the Prodigal Child Project and Let My People Vote.
And where are you based out of?
Dothan, Alabama, Dothan. That's D as in dog, O as in open, T as in Tom, H as in Harry, A as in Apple, N as in Nancy, Dothan, Alabama. It's right on the borderline of Georgia and Florida.
Can you talk a little bit about TOPS?
TOPS, the Ordinary People's Society, it's an organization that I founded and I got an epiphany while I was doing time in prison, 14-year stint, 10-year stint on the last in Florida prison at Polk CI. And God gave me epiphany to clean up where I had messed up. So I replicated the ministry of Jesus, the ministry of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the ministry of Gautama Buddha, and the ministry of all prophets, the ministry how they went and targeted certain areas where people were left behind, where people were ignored, diminished, demeaned, people were discounted, and of course, in our times, disenfranchised with non-voting rights. So that's where TOPS come from. Out of that vision came a 3-point stand, I would say, which consists of HHH. That's homeless, hungry, and harm reduction. We feed about 300 people a day. I named the soup kitchen after my mother, Mama Tina. We call it Mama Tina's Mission House. And what we do there is feed about 300 people a day in Dothan, Alabama. What it was to do is feed people so it would curb their high. When people are hungry, they'll have a tendency to rob your house, break in your house, rob your store, steal or whatever, because people are going to survive. But if you feed them, it curbs their high, and usually they'll go to sleep or they'll just calm down or whatever. The other part of TOPS is the M&M program, which is monitoring and mentoring. Everybody got a mentoring program, want to mentor the youth and this and that and the other, but nobody was monitoring what's going on with the youth, what's happening in their household, what's happening with them in school. Is it a single-parent household? Is it a way that somebody is there to coach these young men and young women back into society in a real functional way? So we concentrated on mentoring and monitoring as well. The last part is the Prodigal Child Project. The Prodigal Child Project targets 4 different target audiences in this product, in its totality. What that consists of is people who had interruptions in their life that needed transitioning. That is people that had interruptions in their life from drugs, that needed transitioning, people that had interruptions in their life from homelessness, that needed transitioning, and people, of course, that had interruptions in their life from incarceration. And the last but not least is while everybody was paying attention to the high school dropout rate, we paid attention to the first-year college dropout rate, which was just as high, but nobody seemed to pay it any attention. The other side of the Prodigal Child Project is for people who've never been incarcerated, who wasn't directly impacted, never been on drugs, never been homeless. But, you know, there's a biblical state in the Bible where it talks about the prodigal son that comes home. The father received him with open arms, gave him a coat of colors, gave him shoes on his feet, gave him a ring on his finger, and killed the fatted calf with the necessities of life. So in the Prodigal Child Project, we can have the mothers and fathers of the prodigal children, sisters and brothers, sons and daughters, aunts and uncles, for those who are allies and friends and family who have never had these interruptions in their life, but definitely could help and aid in the transitioning. And that is TOPS.
That's a lot. That sounds really, really helpful.
Yes, sir.
Well, so with that introduction to the organizing that you're doing in Dothan, can you talk a little bit about the support that you've been giving to Kinetic Justice Amun? He just came off of I think 7-day hunger strike. And I'd like to know if you could tell listeners a little bit about Kinetic and about his hunger strike and about the demands that led to it.
So, Kinetic Justice, Robert Earl Council, is a young man that suffers from to me, a false charge or a charge that he's not entirely guilty of. Capital murder charge. He has life without parole. Comes from the area in which I'm in called the Wiregrass. He's right up the road from me, about 19 miles from Dothan, Alabama, the place called Enterprise, Alabama. Kinetic Justice has a very, very prominent family inside Enterprise, Alabama that works and been a part of taxpaying and law-abiding citizens, been a part of that city for the longest. It's one of the fastest growing cities right now in Alabama in this lower southeast corner. Kinetic is a person that, since he's been there over 23 years, has been very, very instrumental in stopping a lot of violence and a lot of things from happening in prison that would occur had he not been there. He formulated Prisoners Against Violence and also the Free Alabama movement along with 2 other guys. And he's just been a person that has really, really tried to succumb, his obstacles that he's facing, but help younger and older and all do the same thing. One of the things that I would say about him and the rest of those guys, and in 2014, when they asked me to become their national representative and national spokesperson, we had a real, there was sort of a conflict or a real discussion, hard discussion about me being a spokesperson because I had not been incarcerated since 2001. This was in 2014. However, we could not say that now with all the false charges that they have come with and derived with and all. Kinetic was able to overcome all the obstacles and barriers that hold us separate and apart now. That is race, religion, the barriers of being locked up, and of course, the biggest one to me, communication. And he is a person that if you listen to him, if you hear him, if you're in his presence, then you feel and know that this is a person that is very, very spiritual and looking for the right side of humanity. I didn't say humanity. I said humanity. Because there's a difference in people just looking at humanity and being human and coexisting, and a person that's looking at humanity and they coexist and have passion for others just as well as themselves. That's a big difference that I catch on. So Kinetic was able to formulate and organize this group called the Free Alabama Movement that concentrated on stopping the violence inside the prisons and all. And he has joined up with me and myself, being the one that's the first and only person in the world still to this day that ever won a lawsuit where they could vote out of prison in the state of Alabama. The only other 2 states they could vote out of prison is in Maine and Vermont. And, of course, me and you both know that there's only 7% and 9% black people, people other than white, inside those 2 states. So Alabama is being the first and only state where it ever been won. A lawsuit has been won where people could vote out of prison. And they got in touch with me, asked me to represent them. Of course, I took it and felt honored about it. And we've been working together ever since. We have our conversations through his family members and all, like daily, to where we talk about what's needed, what needs to be best and all. One of the things I would say about Kinetic Justice, about Robert Earl Council, is he never considers himself. He looks at his charge. He looks at what he's there for, and he got LWOP, life without parole. But when we talked for almost 2 years, this young man would talk about what laws need to be changed, the Habitual Offender Act, the Innocence Inquiry Commission, what's going on with the juveniles, how we need to look at our different Open Records Act, How did you change that law, Glasgow, with voting rights? What about the Constitution contradicting itself? You know, with the Eighth Amendment and the 13th Amendment being contradictory, because it says in the 13th Amendment, no man can be held under involuntary servitude or slavery except to buy for felony conviction as a means of what? Punishment. But yet in the Eighth Amendment, it says that there should be no cruel and unusual punishment. Well, what's more cruel and unusual than slavery itself? But one of the things that highlight this young man, Kinetic Justice, Robert Earl Council, is out of all of this and all of our talking, all of the planning, all of the organizing, he never talked about himself. He never even talked about getting himself out. And I asked him this one day. I said, look, let me ask you something, my brother. Why are you not trying to get help for you? Why are you not trying to get yourself out? And his words to me, and I quote, was, I see so much suffering, so much harm, so much pain, so much hurt in some of these younger brothers and brothers that's in here with me that I guess I don't have time to consider what I'm going through. That's Kinetic Justice. And that's the brother we're talking about, that will stand up and do whatever he has to do for his fellow man, even sometime before he would do it for his own self. So he went on this 7-day hunger strike. And the reason why is because they came up and sensationalized the Department of Corrections and Governor Kay Ivey just put in a plan to try to get $900,000 bond to build 3 new state-of-the-art supermax prisons in the state of Alabama. Well, I've been fighting that for the past 2 or 3 years as an advocate because of the fact that not only will these supermax prisons bring about this and programs and this and that and other, but guess what else it would bring? It will bring 5,000 to 10,000 more beds, as well as bringing in industries and companies that are not here that will be leasing out. We will go back to convict leasing. And that's the part nobody is talking about. You know, I just looked at the 18th USC law about labor and force of labor and looked at the fact that are we violating that force of labor, because nobody wants to talk about that. And so Kinetic Justice was there at St. Clair. Now, let me give you the story. He was in solitary confinement for a period of over 53 months. 53 months. In home and corrections, he was in solitary confinement. They released him. They finally released him out of solitary confinement to go to St. Clair Correctional. 21 days prior. 21 days prior to this incident. Upon this day, they brought in all these different law enforcement agencies, the state troopers, the FBI, all these different law enforcement agencies, made a big fiasco out of it and sensationalized this grandstand that we're going to go in St. Clair, who is known and have been known for the violence and people dying and getting stabbed and killed every day. All of a sudden, they're going to go in here, they're going to get all these knives, all these phones, all this contraband out of this prison. They ended up corralling up and getting 30 young men, 30 young men. Out of those 30 young men, 22 of them, two, Kinetic making 23. 23 of them, that leaves only 7, did not have any infraction, did not have any disciplinary, did not have any contraband, did not have any reason for them to corral them and take them to home in prison and lock them up in solitary confinement. When Kinetic Justice seen this, Kinetic said, oh no, this is not right. According to their own rules and regulations, they're not supposed to put anybody in solitary confinement unless they have an infraction, committed the infraction, or have a disciplinary action against them. Neither one of those 23 have it, including Kinetic. One of the things that I want to advise people of so people won't have the misnomer, is that every other prison there's a grievance procedure in states surrounding Alabama. However, in the state of Alabama, there is no grievance procedure or due process. Understand me clearly. There's no grievance procedure or due process. The only way that they get any kind of relief is they have to commit a lawsuit or they have to get a lawyer and do a Seg 8 or something like that. They have to file for a habeas corpus or Rule 32. Outside, there's no grievance procedure within the prison system. So Kinetic Justice see no other way to stand up for what was right but to go on a hunger strike and state the fact that you have locked me and 22 others up for no infraction, for no disciplinary action, and I will not eat. I will go on a hunger strike until you bring us back to general population.
This is the Final Straw Radio, and I'm William Goodenough. This is Pastor Glasgow of the Ordinary People's Society talking about inside-outside organizing in Alabama against poverty, violence, and prison slavery.
And he had just filed a habeas writ that was allowed to skip into mootness by the administration in, I think, November, when he was actually put back into general population, right?
Exactly.
They sat on him for a year and a half in solitary. I think a year and a half. I think it was from 2017. Well, at least from 2016, I think. And then finally they were just like, oh, it's about to go to court. We're just not going to... We're going to let you back into general pop for a couple of months so that the court case goes away, which is a dastardly way of affecting life on someone who's stuck in a cage.
Well, this was the antebellum South, so to say dastardly is an understatement. Look at all the egregious and heinous acts that have been committed. We have to look at this is the new modern day slavery. So when we look at the forced labor laws, when we look at the convict leasing laws, when we look at all these different things that's going on, even where I sit in Dothan, Alabama, and Dothan, Alabama used to be called the White Belt, where I'm at. This is where Connecticut's from, also Enterprise, Alabama. This used to be called the White Belt. The only reason that black people was brought here was under convict leasing. That's what black people. So in this area, if you look at it in the southeast corner of Alabama, we're known for being the most people to send people to prison per capita, and we have the most death penalty cases than anywhere else in America. Any other city, especially in the state of Alabama. So we have to look at all these things. So that's what they do. They'll sit up there and hold on to something, make sure it goes, time for it to go to court, then they'll make it a moot situation, just as they did, and that's the way they act. Kinetic Justice, however, is a person that is very, very strategic and tactful. Strategic and tactful. He's been there a long time. One of the things that we got to highlight is that this is not, we talk about the prison strike that happened in 2014. What about the one that happened in 2016, 2017? These young men and young women went beyond race, beyond religion, beyond the fact of being locked up, and still communicated with the Free Alabama movement. Not only went into a prison strike with Alabama, but 20 other states. 20 other states in communication with them followed.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. Like when you look at the scope of it and the fact that it's been reproduced and it's happened again and again. And the work that in 2014 that Kinetic and Benu Hannibal, Rasan, and other organizers with Free Alabama, what they set in motion, like they weren't the first, but they're such an inspirational part of the movement for liberation of prisoners in the United States. And
well, let's look at when you say they wasn't the first. Well, the first would have been Georgia, and I was the representative for them in December 9th, 2012. And that's the first time that it ever went across one prison, besides Attica. It went across one prison. There was 10 prisons in Georgia. That's the first time they had a multi-prison peaceful strike. And that inspired them in California to go on the multi-prison hunger strike. And then we have the Free Alabama movement right behind it that went across states. So it is the first time that went multi-prison and multi-state.
But I'm saying that this is like a trajectory that each of the people that participate and raise up the voices in the meantime, they're inspiring other voices that are using new methods that are like able to grow and grow and grow. So not meaning to deride them by saying that they weren't the first, but
Exactly. And so what we have now is we have an inside and outside strategy. That inside strategy is to stop the violence, to address issues within the prison and and getting each other registered to vote, getting each other seats. So I started the campaign Free to Vote. And I asked Connecticut and them to start a campaign Vote for Me. So people that can't vote inside the prison because they have a crime of moral turpitude, be it murder, be it sex crimes or crimes of, like terrorist acts or something like that, those are the ones that can't vote because those are crimes of moral turpitude. In simple layman's term, a crime of moral turpitude is a crime that causes hurt, harm, danger, suffering to someone else. So people that got sales of drugs or possession of drugs, something like that, those are not crimes of moral turpitude. Okay? So they're starting the Vote for Me campaign. So in the Doug Jones race, December 12, 2017, we were able to get Doug Jones inside and in a 25-year Republican rule in the states, in the United States Congress and for Senate, because those 8,000 to 10,000 of us, formerly and currently incarcerated people voted together to get Doug Jones in there against Roy Moore. They did a bribe part report on me. They attacked me. They came at me with everything and all. What people don't understand is that was partly because of the work and all that Swift Justice, that Kinetic Justice, that Juan, that all of them are doing inside the prison to organize people and register people to vote from inside.
Can you talk about what
after my lawsuit of 2008. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask if you could talk more about what does it look like in communities that are engaged in the Free Alabama movement on the outside? What sort of support, what sort of communication, what sort of messaging? I remember at one point, I think during the 2014 period, there were demonstrations at businesses like McDonald's that used prison labor in their production to sort of raise awareness around it in solidarity with the people behind borders or behind the walls.
So what we did was we targeted different places like Whole Foods. If you notice, Whole Foods that stopped, and then we targeted Aramac. That was doing the foods in MIT up there in Baltimore, that college. They stopped them from renewing their contract up there in the college up there in Baltimore. These are the different acts that took place. We would go do protests at Limestone Prison. When they locked Kinetic Justice up at Limestone, we would start targeting and doing phone banking and phone zapping to different businesses that use prison labor. Because one of the things people couldn't really fathom, and I guess people need to understand now, is that it's ironic that they will use us in our labor for free labor inside prison, or maybe they'll give us a quarter an hour. Maybe we'll have $12 a month, for this free labor. But then when we get out, we couldn't even get a job with the same company or industry that we work for inside prison. And these states have these contracts with these industries and with these companies and use us for that same free labor. I mean, if we just look at it in this definition, this is exactly how they did slavery. This is exactly what slavery was about. We just take the race away from it and look at it in its totality. It was about what? Free labor. So that's exactly what we did on the inside. The other thing that we did was we started supporting their voting. What I have asked and what we have talked about as far as me and Kinetic Justice and all the brothers in Free Alabama movement is that they would do the candidate opponent research. See, I'm giving you some debut stuff right now. They got time to do the candidate opponent research on what the legislators are voting for this and that. So who is better for us to vote in our interests? And then you got to look at each and every person that is locked up, that is incarcerated, whether it's in jail or whether it's in prison. They have at least 2 to 5 people that support them, whether it's family or whether it's friends or just associates. And they're able to influence that 2 to 5 on who they should vote for and who they should not. We're changing the game down here. And this is all derived behind that lawsuit we got where they could vote out of prison and vote out of jail. I started them from voting out of jail in 2003. So the support looks very, very different down here for the Free Alabama movement than it might look somewhere else, because we get our directives and some of our objectives and what we need to do from those that are on the inside. Because if we're truly advocates and truly representing those who are still under this oppression, then really we should take some directives and orders from them. One of the things that I want to say is that in the women's movement, who's the lead and center of the women's movement? Women. In the LGBTQ movement, who's the lead and center of the LGBTQ? The LGBTQ. So why in the criminal justice movement, the directly impacted, formerly incarcerated, and currently incarcerated people are not the lead and center of the criminal justice movement? The next thing I would say is that we are the most diverse movement that ever existed. The formerly incarcerated people movement. The currently incarcerated people movement. We are black, we are white, we are Asian, we are Hispanic, we are Indian, we are heterosexual, we are homosexual, we are LGBTQI in the A, we are poor, we are rich, we are formerly, we are currently incarcerated, we're the most demeaned, the most demised, the most discounted, the most disenfranchised. But our vote matters. That's what you will see in this year coming up, even before 2020. As we lift our vote for 2020, you will see us come out with our vote matters.
This is The Final Straw Radio, and I'm William Goodenough. This is Pastor Glasgow of the Ordinary People's Society talking about inside-outside organizing in Alabama against poverty, violence, and prison slavery.
Seems like I can see the implications of that, especially in a society that has been historically, while enfranchisement has happened, trying to rip that enfranchisement from more marginalized parts of the population, people of color, of poor folks in general, and the way that class and race intersect in the U.S. is like undeniable. It also seems like an important part of the work that the Free Alabama movement has done, inspired by the folks on the inside and taken up by people on the outside, such as you, is to rebuild those communities and rebuild those relationships that have been busted up by the carceral system in the U.S., ways of dividing up the working classes of people, ways of dividing up communities and dividing up families. And certainly some of that is the fact that people hurt each other, and that's how some people end up in prison. But it seems like the work that y'all have done is in part inspirational to healing those wounds, and with that aptly named prodigal son.
Let me give you a prime example of what we do with the Prodigal Child Project. So we in TOPS, we've been in existence since 2001. What we have been doing, and the reason that they chose me to be their representative, we serve about 150 children of incarcerated parents every Christmas.
How many?
About 450. Wow. 450 children of incarcerated parents. Now, the way we do it is different from Tots for Toys and all that, and Salvation Army and all that. We do it totally different, our angel tree. Our angel tree consists of you coming to Mama Tina's kitchen, you picking off a child, the picture and what the child wants and the sizes and all that. But guess where it's different at? Instead of you bringing us the toys or bringing us the gifts to give to the child, every Christmas Eve at 12 o'clock for the past 17 years, we would have the rich and the poor come together, the have and the have-nots come together. And what they would do is they would come and meet at our TOPS headquarters our Tops Empowerment Center. And those of you who chose the angel tree off the tree will give the toys to the children themselves. Now, here's the caveat. So we're not giving the children the gifts. The people who bought the gifts for the children are giving them to the children. But you ready for the caveat? Sometime we will just so happen God will step in and we will match up the assailant with the victim. Oh, you missed that. You missed that. So we will have the person, say some guy broke in somebody's house and his kids is one of our angel trees. And the people who he broke in their house want to help buy kids some gifts. We will match them together so that the same person, do you see what we're doing? So it's restoring families. It's restoring our communities. It's restoring our state. It's restoring our cities. Somebody say restore. It's restoring our voting rights. Once we get the mindset of restoring a person by them learning, there's only two things in this existence that declare you a citizen. That's your birth certificate and your born rights, right? So your birth certificate says that you're a citizen, but what declares and decree you full citizenship is your voting rights. It's your voting rights. So this is why they take your voting rights. So once we get a person their rights back, then they have their full citizenship. Then they have a mindset to be a citizen, a mindset not to lose their citizenship, a mindset to try to learn how to become a productive citizen. And this is what Kinetic Justice is teaching on the inside and what we're teaching on the outside. And we have just come together so we can restore our communities holistically.
Well, bringing it back to Kinetic, do you have any updates about how his health is, where he's at, or what the current status of his demand is?
Yes. So where he's at right now is he's a kill beat. They have him under medical. The attorney from Department of Corrections has agreed with his attorney, David Gespass, that he will be placed back into general population after medical releases him, and he's restored back to full health, this and that and the other. They have to have him under observation for so long a period of time after holding a strike. But at this particular time, Kinetic Justice has sent all of us word that he is all right, he is strong as ever, and he is ready to come back and continue to restore our communities.
Is there anything that people in the listening audience should do to help continue to apply pressure to the state that they actually will follow through with what they've promised?
Well, first of all, we thank God for everybody that made phone calls to the Department of Corrections in Alabama and to home in prison. And what we would ask is that people would stand guard, stand by, looking for any messages, anything that comes from us, should they not do it. But according to the lawyers, they should. However, we will ask people to stand by because we would ask them to make more phone calls. And if y'all want to help donate, there's three things that people suffer from in prison to determine whether they'll get killed by a guard, whether they'll get killed by an inmate by a guard because a guard then paid the inmate to kill him, or whether they'll be treated justly and equal inside prison. And those three things are visits, phone calls, and letters. If you don't have a prison ministry, if you don't do anything in your organization concerning people in jail and prison, if you are somebody that's out there and hearing this, remember, we changed the language at the end of President Barack Obama's tenure. Right before he left, Department of Justice was coming to take over the Alabama prisons, not because of their inhumane treatment, and as well because Tutwiler, which is the only female prison in the state of Alabama, had more rapes and more women pregnant with kids than any other prison in America. And so they was about to take over this prison, and then we had the transformation that took place from Obama to what we have now. So you could definitely help by sending letters. You could definitely help by sending donations. You could definitely help by allowing yourself to be able to be called, going inside the prisons, or calling us at TOPS, the Ordinary People Society. Go to our website, theordinarypeoplesociety.org. Go to their website, thefreealabamamovement.org, or call us at 334-791-2433. That's 334-791-2433. And remember, these are people with felony convictions. The key and operative word is people. We're not ex-felons. We're not ex-convicts. We're not ex-offenders. We are formerly and currently incarcerated people with felony convictions. If you never made a mistake, you know you already in heaven. If you never committed something, crime or against the law, then you must be already in heaven. If you have never done nothing wrong, then surely you must be perfect and already in heaven. So remember, we are human beings, and please be humane. And remember, we are people. Somebody's brother, somebody's father, somebody's sister, somebody's mother, somebody's son, somebody's daughter. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Pastor.
This is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville, specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.